Well, good afternoon and welcome back to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams, and here we are on January 2nd, ready to begin a new year. I hope your Christmas and New Year's went very well. Mine was, well, I'll just say it was just another day, and it was melodramatic because I had to make sure I was prepared to give you all of the great content that we're giving you today. We've reset our Christmas countdown. Guess what? There's 358 shopping days left until Christmas of 2016. But I also think more importantly, there's only 54 more weeks until the next presidential inauguration. Yes, it is that time of year again. That time in the political season where we all start looking forward to the Iowa Caucuses. But before we start talking about the Iowa Caucuses, we're going to go back just a little bit in time by about 2 weeks to finish up with some unfinished business that we never got a chance to talk about in 2015. A story that hit the Star Tribune on December 14th. 14,800 Minnesotans face deep pension cuts. Hundreds of thousands of Teamsters' retirement pay at risk. And essentially, this is the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. And it is under severe stress right now. It may collapse. And the thing is, with the pension plans, kind of like Social Security, you'd have a lot of people who would be paying into the system and fewer people taking out. But now that's reversed because you have too few Teamsters who are paying into the system, and you have more people who are retired and taking out, and as a result, we're starting to see that everybody's pension is now being at risk. And you got these guys who retired when they're in their 60s, and they're now in their mid-70s, and they're making $2,500, $3,000 a month. Hey, that's money that they paid into the system. By all means, they should be taking it right out. That's what a pension fund is for. But if you don't have enough resources to continue to put in, or you have bad investments, which also was the case with Central States Pension Fund, guess what? The pension fund might be going under. And that's actually a bad thing. It's a bad thing because that puts we taxpayers at risk to subsidize somebody else's bad decision. But I just want to let you know that the $17 billion Central States Fund is the first to seek cutbacks under the 2014 Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act. And this is something that we just got to be watching for in the near future. According to that Star Tribune story from 2 weeks ago, if they're 70, who's going to hire them? Well, that's a good question. If they're 70, who's going to hire them? I think really this is more indicative of one important thing, and this is where we're going to be talking about the Iowa Caucuses here. This shows that the policies set forth by the Obama administration have been harmful for our economy, and we've had such long periods of stagnant growth that guess what, folks? The Teamsters are getting hurt by this. The Teamsters are getting hurt because there are fewer Teamsters on the roadways. And that means that until we can get a robust economy, we're not going to be able to save Social Security, and we're not going to be able to save the Central States Pension Plan. So something that we're going to have to just keep an eye on and report back as more news is available. Speaking of more news, if you happen to just be tuning into the show for the first time, or if you just need a reminder, on the bottom of our screen is our YouTube address, youtube.com/North Star Oasis. And we do encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to refresh yourself with some of the rich material that we've presented over the course of the last year, because we really had a very jam-packed year filled with a lot of great information. All of our archives are available on our YouTube channel, and they are yours for the watching, for the viewing pleasure. One other item that I want to bring up, and of course I forgot to bring it up on my email. I did get an email regarding a guest that we brought on a few weeks back, and let me see if I can grab it real quick. South Washington County citizens. We brought on Andrea Meyer-Brusel from South Washington County. She was a school board candidate, and she was one of the people who was responsible on the Vote No campaign on their $96 million bonding referendum. And it looks like the trial, because going back to that show, we'd shown there were 19 ballots that were in question for whether or not the referendum was going to pass or fail. And so it's, at the time, they were trying to come up with the money to pay the court fee of $5,000. They did manage to come up with that cash. They have gone through and filed a court motion. And it looks like on Monday at 8:30 a.m. at the Washington County Courthouse in Stillwater is when the trial is set to begin. That was the most recent information that was given to me. Of course, that is still subject to change, but it looks like they are proceeding on that particular issue. So that's another item of newsworthiness that we continue to track. And then in the presidential campaign, something that happened last month was our national bird, the bald eagle, and the Republican front-running candidate, Donald Trump. They got into a tiny little bit of a clash. Let's take a look at the video.
Yeah. Put your hand out of the glove.
How's my hair?
No good. No good. No good.
Watch it.
That's great. That's great.
Almost done here. That's great.
Look at the burger. You don't show the aspirin over there.
His aspirin.
Which aspirin? We're not doing it again, don't worry. I'm doing this for the cover of Time magazine. I love Time magazine. What you will do for a cover, this bird is seriously dangerous but beautiful.
Did you see that? Donald Trump got attacked by a bald eagle. Now, I've actually worked with bald eagles at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center about, 15 years ago. But let's play this back again. I want to give you a little bit of commentary as we take a look at this. Because was he really attacked? Well, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, pause the video there for just a second. That is not an attack. That is a bird who is probably between 9 and 11 pounds, who's just a little bit unstable in going onto the leather glove held by a new handler that bird is not used to. So that is actually pretty normal. That's just trying to get the bird stabilized. Continue. And the bird is stable now and calm.
No good. No good. No good.
Watch it.
That's great.
Donald is nervous.
Almost done here. That's great.
Okay, now, right here, stop it right here. Watch what Donald Trump is doing with his hand. He's going to be reaching for an aspirin. The thing is, bald eagles are extremely territorial, and and they have very powerful eyesight, but at the same time, they get startled very easy. So take a look at what Donald Trump does right now.
You don't show the aspirin over there.
Right there, bing. Now,
His aspirin.
okay, pause it right there. Now that bird was just protecting his turf, not knowing what Donald Trump was going to do, but that was the fact that Trump reached for an aspirin. And when you got a bald eagle right there, you got to respect the turf. So that's kind of what happened there. Donald Trump got attacked, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. And of course, with any time Donald Trump is mentioned in the media, it is a big deal just because it's Donald Trump. But really, there was really nothing there. The bald eagle was not attacking Trump. The bald eagle was not against Trump. And if the bald eagle could vote, the bald eagle might even vote for Trump. But we know that eagles can't vote that we're aware of yet. Unlike certain dead residents in the city of Chicago in the 1960 election, bald eagles haven't quite reached that status yet. Now, we're less than a month away from the beginning of the official voting period for the nomination contest for president. As I mentioned before, 54 more weeks, and we will be inaugurating a new president. We're going to be voting for a new president in 11 months. But the candidates for both parties have been going around and around and around for months now. And throughout 2015, every week on this show for a number of months, we would highlight each candidate in the order in which they had announced, and just to give you an opportunity to see who was running and what their campaign was about per their announcement. Now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. And so today we're going to take a look at the history of the Iowa Caucuses, because this is a lot of stuff that is coming up in the next month that you're going to be hearing about, but it's important for you to understand in a larger context what this is all about and why it's so important. So let's take a look right now on when fighting an American election is more arduous than ever.
Running for president isn't what it used to be. Just hours after Hillary Clinton announced that she was joining the race for the White House in 2016, she hopped in a van and drove to Iowa to hold a series of low-key, intimate meetings with ordinary voters. In the past 50 years or so, presidential campaigns have become more costly, more choreographed, and more arduous than they used to be. How did that come about? In the old days, the process was less open. Republican and Democratic bigwigs picked their party's nominees in smoke-filled rooms at conventions. Most states didn't hold primary elections, and those that did held non-binding beauty contests. In 1952, Dwight Eisenhower won the Republican primary in New Hampshire without even entering it. A Draft Dwight campaign put his name on the ballot. He won handily. Only then did he decide to run for the White House. On the Democratic side, Adlai Stevenson skipped the primaries entirely, but was picked by grandees at the party convention. In the 1960s, many Americans got fed up with having cigar-puffing insiders pick their candidates. In 1968, Senator Eugene McCarthy ran for the Democratic nomination on an anti-Vietnam War platform. He won 18 times as many votes as Hubert Humphrey, the vice president, but the party picked Humphrey anyway. The Democratic convention in Chicago that year was rocked by violent protests, and Humphrey eventually lost to Richard Nixon, the Republican. Afterwards, a commission chaired by George McGovern and Donald Fraser, a senator and a congressman, recommended reform. Democratic primaries were made binding, and the Republicans soon followed suit. Before long, all states started holding primaries or caucuses, and candidates were forced to pitch directly to voters. This reform made election campaigns longer. It takes time to kiss all those babies, eat all those chicken dinners with apparent relish, and answer endless questions in town hall meetings. It can be grueling. Barack Obama launched his first presidential campaign 633 days before polling day in 2008, with a speech 6 times longer than the one John F. Kennedy made to announce his candidacy in 1960. The media now starts speculating about the next election the moment the previous one is over. The New York Times appointed a journalist to cover Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign in July 2013. Running for president now requires an iron constitution, an unshakable self-belief, and the ability to dance elegantly around the truth.
Imagine a president who stands unapologetically with the nation of Israel.
For a start, candidates must convince voters of 2 contradictory things. First, that they are so exceptionally talented that they should be commander-in-chief.
Across the country, the deck is still stacked in favor of those already at the top.
And second, that they are regular folks, just like you. The people who vote in primaries tend to be more politically extreme than the country as a whole. So to win a contested primary, candidates must present themselves as passionate liberals or ardent conservatives. Then they have to tack back to the centre to woo the moderates who decide general elections. It's a delicate manoeuvre which most candidates fail to pull off. Still, someone has to win, and the race is just beginning.
Well, there's one thing that they never really talked about much in that particular video was that the Republicans and Democrats have a little bit different way on the entire nomination process, and that is the difference between delegates and superdelegates. If you are a member of in the Democrats' case, if you're a member of the Democrat National Committee, from, there's delegates coming from each state, plus the state party chairman. If you are a elected official in a certain capacity, member of Congress, a governor, state rep, state senator, there's a number of people who are superdelegates, and that is by the position that they hold, they are automatically guaranteed a spot at the national convention, and these are the ones that the major candidates woo for their support, whereas everybody else is just a regular delegate. And those delegates are determined based upon the caucus and caucus and primary elections and the delegate allotment per state. So the Republicans have a little bit of that superdelegate, but it's not quite the same way, because I believe there's only I'm not sure how it is with elected officials, members of Congress, but I do know, at least in Minnesota, we have, of the delegates that we have from here, you have the state party chairman, you have the national committee man, national committee woman. So you got those three are automatically slated delegates, and then the rest are delegates that come out of the precinct caucus system. Now, exactly how all of that works, I'm not exactly sure, and how it goes nationally, but really, as of the 1st of February, on a Monday, when they have the first ballots cast in the Iowa caucus, that's when the nomination process starts, and it's all about the delegates. It's all about the delegates, and I'm going to repeat that again. It's all about the delegates. Everything else is inconsequential. National polling does not matter. It all depends on delegate count, and I took some amusement, having been involved with the political system and having followed it for so long. I found great amusement in 2015 when I would see all of these people, both Republicans and Democrats, who would be just getting all bent out of shape because the national polls show one thing and going against their candidate, and they would take it all so personally, and yet not a single ballot has been cast. And it's all based upon what you have for the delegates. And it's all about the delegates, and it's all about the delegates. And that's going to be all based upon what happens starting February 1st, and really probably going to March 8th, Tuesday, March 8th. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But you're going to see about 6 weeks, and by that time we should have an idea of who both the Republican and Democrat nominees will be for the November general election. But right now, let's take a look a little bit at the history of the Iowa caucuses.
Have tried to bypass Iowa, either because they don't think that the party is a good fit for whatever their message might be. Sometimes they are worried they can't campaign here because they're against certain issues that are important in Iowa. The problem is that as long as the media continues to pay attention to the Iowa caucuses, the candidates are basically missing out on part of the debate and part of the spotlight if they're not here. A caucus is a party meeting, and caucuses are held at the precinct level all over Iowa. There's over 1,000 precincts. And people actually gather at a certain time during the day. They start at 7 o'clock usually. They can expect to spend a couple of hours. And voting on a presidential candidate is only one thing that they do during the caucuses. There are also discussions about platform, and people separately, different parties have different rules, but they stand separately to be elected as delegates to go on in the process. So it's a much more involved time commitment, and it's also something where it draws more activists than rank and file party members. Iowa's had caucuses as long as it's been a state, but the caucuses were something that nobody outside of Iowa paid attention to until the early 1970s. And Iowa's caucuses became prominent out of the 1968 Democratic National Convention riots. The National Party, because of the turmoil in that 1968 National Convention, decided they needed to make their process more inclusive. They wanted to get more young people, more racial minorities. Recognize the fact that a big part of their party was anti-Vietnam War. And so as part of that process, Iowa looked at what they were doing. They wanted to make it more inclusive, have more notice for these caucuses, make it possible for more people to participate. But because Iowa's process is the caucuses and then a series of conventions, they had to figure out a schedule that would allow them to get all of these meetings in and also print all the paperwork in between. And one of the party lore, the party stories is they had this old mimeograph machine that was very slow at printing. And so they had to have a long time to print all the materials. So they set a calendar that made Iowa the first nominating event in the nation in 1972. That wasn't necessarily the goal, but that was the reality. And what happened that year was George McGovern, a South Dakota senator, was running for the Democratic presidential nomination. He was not the establishment favorite. And his campaign manager was a young man named Gary Hart. Gary Hart becomes a name that is much better known later on in his political career. But at that time, managing George McGovern's campaign, decided they needed a boost going into the New Hampshire primary. So he spent a few days out here in Iowa courting the vote. He, in fact, did well in the caucuses, came in a close second to Edward Muskie, and got a little bit of a bump going into New Hampshire. So then, 4 years later, in 1976, an unknown Georgia governor decides, hey, Iowa might be a way to get on the national stage going into the primary season. So Jimmy Carter comes out to Iowa, wins the caucuses, and is launched to the White House. And from there, Iowa could never be ignored again. The Iowa caucuses have really grown from 1976. It started in 76, the Republicans decided to start having their caucuses on the same day as the Democrats, and so both parties have caucused since then. The only year that Iowa didn't really have a competitive caucus race was in 1992. That's when Senator Tom Harkin, who is from Iowa, decided to run for president, and all the other Democrats just decided not to campaign in Iowa. So Harkin didn't make it to the nomination, but there wasn't much of a caucus campaign because of that. Now, we'll find out later that in 2008, when Iowa's governor ran for president, his fellow Democrats did not give him the courtesy of Iowa. He was in fact inundated with other candidates in Iowa and dropped out early. So that Iowa courtesy happened only once and probably never will again. Iowa has become mostly, not really a rocket to the White House for presidential candidates. It's more known for winnowing the field. So the old adage was there's 3 tickets out of Iowa: first class, coach, and standby. And that just means that you have to do well in Iowa to have a good chance of making it to the nomination. So first 3 or first 4 places, depending on how many candidates there are. And typically candidates who don't do well in Iowa have dropped out. At least 1 or 2 candidates have dropped out after Iowa. Iowa is also a place historically where the establishment favorite or the national frontrunner often gets a little air let out of him because you have a situation again where I said you have activists who are either more liberal or more conservative than the party, generally speaking. So Iowa oftentimes does not reward the person that the nation, the national party, the bigwigs, whoever they are, think ought to be president. You don't really have to look any further back than 2008 when everybody before the caucus cycle was talking about Hillary Clinton as being the presumptive nominee. Well, who comes out of the woodwork? A one-term Illinois Senator, Barack Obama, won the Iowa caucuses, which really established his credibility as somebody who could win over even predominantly white Midwestern states like Iowa. And of course, he made it onto the White House. That's just the most recent example. Also in 2012, we had, on the Republican caucuses, Mitt Romney, very likely to be the Republican nominee, and in fact he did go on to win the Republican nomination. But here in Iowa, he was not guaranteed the vote of Iowa caucus goers. He lost the caucuses in 2008 to Mike Huckabee, a evangelical, popular with conservatives, little-known governor from Arkansas. In 2012, it was Rick Santorum, former Pennsylvania senator, considered the darkest of dark horses on the national scene. And he actually practically tied with Mitt Romney for the caucuses in 2012. And actually, as they counted this historically close vote a couple of weeks later, it turned out that Romney was actually edged out by Santorum.
Game on.
People tend to really get keyed into politics because of the caucuses. It's become sort of a not even if not everybody participates, everybody watches it. It's a fun spectator sport for Iowans, and so therefore they have opinions about the issues.
And so if you are looking for somebody to blame for the Carter presidency and the Obama presidency, you can go ahead and blame our neighbors to the south in Iowa. They're the ones who set us up for both of those administrations. But anyhow, all joking aside, we do want to take a look at the views of one veteran journalist who had covered a lot of the Iowa caucuses over the years, and that's Bruce Morton. And this is a piece that was originally out in 2000, so we're going back 16 years ago, but this gives a good remembrance of what happened from 72 up until going into 2000.
Joining me now, our own Bruce Morton with some of his memories of Iowa caucuses past. Bruce, you were here for the very first ones, 1972. The Democrats wanted to stir something up, the Hart campaign.
Well, George McGovern, the South Dakota senator, had headed a commission studying the rules, looking at them. So they'd figured out, hey,
Hart was
caucuses.
managing McGovern's campaign,
Yeah.
right?
And Ed Muskie was the front runner, but McGovern came here and campaigned, flying around in 2 little airplanes, one of which had heat. We voted the candidate ought to get heat. And there were maybe a dozen reporters on caucus night, maybe 1 or 2 networks, I don't know. And everybody wrote it was surprisingly strong, second place showing. And somewhere down in Georgia, Jimmy Carter said, aha. And 4 years later, when he was an unemployed ex-governor, he couldn't have done it if he'd had a regular job, he came and lived in the state. Well, you were here that year.
I was here covering
And you know,
Jimmy
you'd
Carter.
go and people would say, I stayed over at the house, you know, Jimmy stayed at the house. And the first time we went to find him, we were out at some farmhouse. We really wanted to talk to Tim Kraft, who was organizing the state. We had to listen to the whole Carter speech first, delivered to me and one colleague. And then we finally got to talk to Tim.
All right, that was 1976. Move on. By that point, Iowa was critical. If you wanted to run for president, you had to make an appearance.
Yeah, you had to be here. You didn't have to win, but you had to sort of emerge. It was a winnowing process. Everybody said. 80 was the year. There's a political consultant in Alexandria named Rich Bond who was there because his great success was that in 80, on the George Bush letter, he said, here are the names of some neighbors who'll be going to the caucus for George. You might want to go with them. And Bush beat Ronald Reagan. Peaked, of course, never threatened for the nomination after that, but that was his moment in the sun.
And 80 was also the year that Ted Kennedy got 30%. Jimmy Carter beat him, but he still gave him a scare.
Well, I think most of us thought that was a bad beating. I wouldn't be very happy with 30%, would you?
84, Fritz Mondale.
That's the one I, to this day, don't understand. Mondale came out here, Gary Hart was running. Mondale got 49%, I think. Hart got 16, I think. And we all trounced, beaten, whipped. And somehow he got enough bounce to win the New Hampshire primary and almost won the nomination.
And really hurt Mondale.
Oh, really damaged Mondale,
in the process. Now, the last time we've had 2 contested primaries was 88.
Right. I think that's really where the rules shows you have to finish at least 3rd. Dick Gephardt, the congressman, won, but Michael Dukakis, the eventual nominee, was a respectable 3rd, and that was okay for a Greek-American from Massachusetts, whom no one here had ever heard of. George Bush, who would be the nominee, was 3rd in a big surprise. That was the stunner that year. Not that Bob Dole, farm state next door, beat him, but that Pat Robertson finished 2nd. And if we didn't know Christian conservatives were powerful here before that, we surely knew it after that.
And in terms of the numbers of press people here, Bruce, I mean, you've gone from literally a handful to
88 was wall-to-wall. They've all been wall-to-wall lately. I have a feeling, which I couldn't possibly prove, that there were some fewer of us this time. I don't think I see quite as many satellite trucks in the street.
My goodness, that's, I think we may have committed news here if that's the case, because everybody else has been saying there are more of us than ever before. You may be the only one saying there are fewer.
I got into the best steakhouse twice, and there can't be as many as there used to be.
All right, Bruce Morton, thanks. I love hearing about the history of this place.
Absolutely.
Bernie.
Thanks, Judy. There's still so much more ahead here in this special 90-minute edition of Inside Politics coming up as Bill Bradley prepares.
And so that was from 2000, a recollection from Bruce Morton on the history of the Iowa caucuses. I was actually down in Iowa in 2008 and was observing, not necessarily the inside, I was actually driving through Iowa then, and I'll tell you, there were a lot of people who were going to caucuses. I was in Des Moines on the caucus night, so I actually stopped at Mitt Romney's hotel because that was the only one I knew. I didn't stay there. And I'll tell you, there was just a lot of energy and a lot of momentum for both Governor Romney in 08. I saw a lot of stuff out there, but it was really cantankerous between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. But I'll tell you, that was when you really knew. When the Iowa caucuses hit, this is campaign season once again. And we're a month away from that. So now we're going to take a look more at the intricacies of the caucuses, what makes a caucus, and then look at the use of new adaptive technologies in reporting the results that are hopefully will be more accurate this year.
This is Iowa. Every 4 years, the world looks on as Iowans cast their opinions in the crucial first stop on the road to a U.S. presidential election. It's the first official event in the nation in a primary season, an early bellwether of election year politics, and it's known famously as the Iowa Caucuses. So, what is a caucus? In common use, it's defined simply as a gathering of neighbors. But in reality, there's a bit more to it. The process differs between Democrats and Republicans, but their goal is the same: to choose delegates from each of Iowa's 1,700 or so voting precincts who will go on to represent their candidate at the county, district, and state conventions, and ultimately at the Democratic and Republican national conventions, where presidential candidates are officially nominated. Let's start with the Republican process. On a designated day near the beginning of an election year, in 2016 it'll be around February 1st, Iowans are called to a public meeting place to discuss the presidential candidate they personally prefer. Representatives from each campaign are typically present to offer the case for their candidate. Turnout in each precinct ranges anywhere from hundreds of people down to just a few. Eventually, discussion ends and voters cast a secret ballot. Votes are tallied and the results are reported to the state party, which in turn relays them to the media. Democratic caucuses are held on the same day, and similarly, Iowans from each precinct meet in a public place, but the process is not based on ballots. The room is first divided into sections, one for each represented candidate, and one for undecided voters, if necessary. Participants physically arrange themselves into groups based on their preference. Supporters of each candidate then try to persuade their neighbors to switch groups for roughly 30 minutes, and then each group is counted. If a group is too small to be considered viable, a threshold which is determined ahead of time using math, the group is dissolved and the remaining groups compete to absorb its members. Non-viable groups could also combine to form a viable group, or absorb members from a viable group in the hope of becoming viable themselves. Once everyone's done moving around, the groups are counted again and the number of delegates assigned to each precinct is divided between the groups using math again. Finally, the number of delegates won by each candidate is reported to the state party, which calculates delegate counts for the state convention and relays those numbers to the media. The sooner that results can be tallied and reported, the better, but most precincts are hundreds of miles away from party headquarters in Des Moines, which begs the question, how does the data get there? Past reporting systems were based around a network of automated telephone surveys, and as a backup, old-school paper forms, which were returned by mail. Across more than 1,700 precincts, with no real verification that the results entered were actually accurate, errors were bound to be made. As an example, a volunteer could mistakenly hit a phone key twice and incorrectly report 22 votes cast for a candidate when only 2 votes were actually counted. Caucuses are often decided on very small margins, and errors in reporting could change the overall outcome. This is where Microsoft is proud to help. Through our partner Internology, Microsoft will release smartphone and tablet apps for iOS, Android, and Windows devices, which will allow authorized and authenticated caucus chairpersons to record and report results for their precinct more intuitively. Separate apps will be made available to support the unique needs of each party's process, and neither party's data will ever be commingled or shared externally. In addition to mobile reporting apps, each party will have a separate results verification app that will allow headquarters staff to monitor incoming results. Anomalies and potential problem areas will be automatically highlighted, and party officials will be able to quickly connect with precinct chairs if issues come up. Once validated, trustworthy results will be instantly sent to media outlets and to the general public through an interactive web app. Results will be visualized on a map as they come in, and users will be able to explore the election by zooming into individual counties and precincts. Party officials will also have access to a more detailed private view, which can help offer deeper insights into their data. The whole system is backed by the security and reliability of the Microsoft Cloud and can deal with as many users as it needs to without skipping a beat. It's robust, it's reliable, and most importantly, it's accurate. The future of civic engagement technology is here, and it all starts in Iowa.
So are you ready for the conspiracy theories to start up again? Are you ready to have people complaining about those state party officials are rigging the elections again because they're the ones who have control over all of this Microsoft data? Or are you ready to hear about Bill Gates is tanking the GOP nomination process and throwing his weight around because they are using his technology, his company's technology? Are you ready for the Democrats to complain about whoever wins the Iowa caucuses because of technology? And folks, that's probably what is going to happen. Now, of course, I hope that it's a transparent system. I hope that we have an election cycle for the nomination contest that we can believe in. But now I'm ready for those who are not going to be pleased with the results to throw around the conspiracy theories. Mark my words, that will probably happen. And here is another thing that is probably going to be adding to those conspiracy theories come February 2nd. Watch this.
Telecaucus is the new buzzword coming to this presidential election cycle. The Iowa Democratic Party is creating a virtual caucus location intended for those in the military serving out of state, as well as for Iowans living abroad. It will take place the evening of February 1st, the same time people here at home are heading to their caucus locations. More information on requirements, as well as a link to register, can be found on cbs2iowa.com.
So, there is another bullet for the conspiracy theorists, and we'll see what happens on Iowa caucus night. But it would not be a bit surprising to me if, I don't know, that's another possibility is what happens if Anonymous attacks, either party. I mean, the cyber hacker group, Anonymous, they're known for tinkering with systems, political systems, and while they may be our allies in the attack against ISIS right now, the fact is it would not be a bit surprising to see them attack the Iowa caucuses through the technology or some way of manipulating the telecaucus. But they'll see what happens. But don't be a bit surprised if somebody brings it up in another month. Now, let's actually take a look on the Democratic side. While we'll take a look at Republicans next week, simply because we're getting down to time constraints here. But let's take a look at the recent Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton race and how it impacts Iowa. They're the ones who seem to be setting the tone for the Iowa caucuses. And it doesn't seem that Martin O'Malley is really getting any traction whatsoever. So let's take a look at this clip from the Associated Press.
Now today, some are trying to rewrite history by saying they voted for one anti-gay law to stop something worse. That's not the case. There was a small minority in the House opposed to discriminating against our gay brothers and sisters, and I am proud that I was one of those members.
Republicans in Congress have now voted more than 50 times to repeal or weaken the Affordable Care Act. They want to force Americans. Yeah, that is worthy of a big bunch of boos, because they want to force Americans to start a contentious health care debate all over again. Now, I believe we can improve the Affordable Care Act, but we're not going to let them take us back to insurance companies writing their own rules again.
And there was an interesting segment that we came across on Bernie Sanders. We're going to just, that's the Associated Press's segment on both of those candidates. Now we're going to take a look a little bit more individually at each one, and we'll do another comparison here. So let's take a look at Bernie Sanders on working with Republicans.
This is an issue on which there's a philosophical divide in the country. As I go out and listen to Iowans ask candidates questions, one of the candidate questions asked is, how will you unite the country? How will you govern a country that's so riven with, a philosophical divide?
Good question. This is what I think. I think absolutely. I am lifetime pro-choice. It's the way I am, ain't gonna change. I am pro-gay rights, have been for many, many years, not gonna change. I am one of the leaders in the United States Senate in fighting for the environment and the need to combat climate change, ain't gonna change. But here's what I would say, Kate. Sometimes on other issues, you would be surprised that there is a lot more commonality of thinking than sometimes the media perceives, okay? James asked me about the minimum wage. Well, you know what? Republicans support raising the minimum wage, so do Democrats. Republicans support rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, so do Democrats. Republicans support a very important issue in dealing with the outrageously high prices of prescription drugs in this country, so do Democrats, and I'm prepared to do that. Many Republicans, by the way, Dean asked me about trade policy, you asked me about trade policies. Guess what? More Republicans are opposed to our trade policies than our Democrats, as a matter of fact. So I think what I can do is bring people together essentially around economic issues, which says, hey, it is time to rebuild the middle class. It is time to demand that the wealthy and large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. On all of those issues, there is broad support in both political bodies. And then what you have to say, guess what? On the abortion issue, we're going to disagree. This is my view. I know I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. But let us at least work to protect our kids and our parents, make sure we don't cut Social Security, but expand Social Security, et cetera, et cetera.
And that was Bernie Sanders. Now let's hear what Hillary Clinton has to say. She's not saying anything so far. Previous one, Dallas.
Any vote that might lead to war should be hard.
Okay, we're having technical
big-hearted country, and we
difficulties here.
should never forget that, and we shouldn't let anybody on the public stage say that we are mean-spirited, that we are going to build walls mentally and physically, that we're going to shut doors, and we're going to lose the talents and the contributions of millions of people who are here doing the best they can, building lives for themselves and their children. At its heart, this is a family issue. If we say that we support families in this country, then that has to mean something. I want to put an end to families being torn apart or hardworking, law-abiding parents having to prepare their kids for the day that mom or dad might be taken away. That's why I still passionately support comprehensive immigration reform legislation with a path to full and equal citizenship. I will work to expand fee waivers so more people seeking naturalization can get a break on the costs. I will increase access to language programs to help people boost their English proficiency. I will enhance outreach and education so more people know their options and are engaged in the process.
And that was Hillary Clinton's stand. She was outlining her immigration reform plan. It seemed just for a moment there that our producer got one little step ahead, but he got it corrected. And now we're going to take a look at a comparison contrast between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on selected issues.
Any vote that might lead to war should be hard, but I cast it with conviction. I know that there have been a lot of questions about Iraq posed to candidates over the last weeks. I've made it very clear that I made a mistake, plain and simple.
Mr. Speaker, in the brief time I have, let me give you 5 reasons why I'm opposed to giving the president a blank check to launch a unilateral invasion and occupation of Iraq, and why I will vote against this resolution.
You are looking at a senator and a former congressman, and as a congressman, I voted against the war in Iraq.
I believe that marriage is not just a bond, but a sacred bond between a man and a woman.
I do not support gay marriage. LGBT Americans are our colleagues, our teachers, our soldiers, our friends, our loved ones. And they are full and equal citizens and deserve the rights of citizenship. That includes marriage. That's why I support marriage for lesbian and gay couples. I support it personally and as a matter of policy and law.
Now, my ears may have been playing a trick on me, but I thought I heard the gentleman a moment ago say something, quote unquote, about homos in the military. Was I right in hearing that expression?
Absolutely. Putting homosexuals in the military.
You said something about homos in the military. Was the gentleman referring to the many thousands and thousands of gay people who have put their lives on the line in countless wars defending this country? Was that the group of people that the gentleman was referring to?
I'm talking about the military. People in the military do not support.
That's not what we were talking about. You used the word homos in the military. You have insulted thousands of men and women who have put their lives on the line.
I'm talking about you and liberals like you that keep.
I go out to high schools all over the state of Vermont. I go to the conservative parts of the state, and I ask the kids, I said, raise your hand. Tell me what you think about gay marriage. And kids kind of shrug their shoulders, and they say, what are you talking about? What is the big deal? Which is exactly what we've always wanted in the first place. What is the big deal? All right.
And let me also say, I will defend the Affordable Care Act.
We've got to defend the Affordable Care Act.
It is time that the United States of America join the rest of the industrialized world and guaranteed health care to all people as a right, not a privilege.
President, would you sign a bill, yes or no, please, in favor of allowing the Keystone XL pipeline?
This is President Obama's decision, and I am not going to second guess him because I was in a position to set this in motion, and I do not think that would be the right thing to do. So I want to wait and see what he and Secretary Kerry decide. If it's undecided when I become president, I will answer your question.
If you listen to what the scientific community is saying overwhelmingly, is that climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. It is already causing devastating problems. So my response to Senator Hoeven is listen to the scientific community. We have got to, as a nation, lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Frankly, we will look like fools throughout the entire global economy if we are advocating more and more dirty oil at the same time as we're talking about the need to combat global warming. So we have got to defeat this Keystone pipeline. We've got to rally the American people to do it, and we've got to get President Obama to be strong on this issue.
We need to fix our dysfunctional political system and get unaccountable money out of it once and for all, even if that takes a constitutional amendment.
And while Mrs. Clinton takes aim at the influence of money, she has not distanced herself from the several super PACs that are backing her, or the cast of wealthy donors who are also supporting her campaign.
In terms of the politics of America, as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, clearly the billionaires, Koch brothers and others, are owning the political process. They will determine who the candidates are. And let me say this thing. If elected president, I will have a litmus test in terms of my nominee to be a Supreme Court justice. And that nominee will say that we are going to overturn this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, because that decision is undermining American democracy. I do not believe that billionaires should be able to buy politicians.
Hillary Clinton says she is going to have a super PAC, says she has to do it. She doesn't like it, but she has to do it to compete. What about that?
I understand where she's coming from. I will not have a super PAC. Look, we announced a week and a half ago, Bob, and since that time, we have had 200,000 people go to BernieSanders.com to sign up for the campaign. We've had close to 90,000 contributions. Do you know what the average contribution was? It's about $43, $43 for middle-class working families. So I don't think we're going to outspend Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush or anybody else. But I think we are going to raise the kinds of money that we need to run a strong and winning campaign.
And that was a look at a comparison between Bernie Sanders, the socialist Democrat Democrat socialist out of Vermont, who always runs as an independent, versus the Hillary Clinton that we all know and don't necessarily trust, who are both running for president on the Democratic ticket, and as we head into the Iowa caucuses. Now, before we conclude today's show, let's take a look at one last clip. This was taken in May, just as things were starting to gear up. And this is a focus group, courtesy of Bloomberg, on Iowa Democrats, on how they look at Hillary and Bernie going into the campaign season.
Tend to be more secretive than even normal politicians. Does anybody agree with that?
No.
You agree with that. Anybody else besides Bill agree with that? Charlie agrees. The three of you agree that they're more secretive. None of the rest of you think that?
I think they're more strategic, maybe. Secretive is, what's secretive, you know, and so they just...
Another thing deriving from both the foundation controversy and the email controversy, some people say the Clintons, again, more than even most politicians, feel they can play by their own rules. Does anybody feel that way?
I think politicians. Yeah.
Andrew, go ahead.
I think they just play the game well. They think ahead before something happens. Just like with the when she's using the, what did you say, it was a non-server or
her own personal server.
Her personal server. I mean, I think she's thinking ahead. She knows what's coming next. She's been there. She's seen it. She knows.
So as people tend to agree with that point of view as opposed to something inappropriate about playing by their own rules?
It's the nature of politicians.
They all do.
So the Republicans have a big field. They might have 15 candidates or so. They're going to have, as some of you referenced, a pretty contested nomination fight.
I count 21.
21. All right, that's a lot. Is anybody running for the Republican nomination who you find appealing?
No.
No. Anybody?
Marco Rubio does have some good views.
What do you find appealing about him?
A lot of his social programs, I think, would be better. He's more left than most Republicans. So.
Okay. Does anybody have anything positive to say about Jeb Bush?
Is that a joke?
Why do you say that?
We don't need any more Bushes in the White House.
Some of you have referenced she doesn't seem to have very stiff competition. Are any of you who want a Democrat elected, want Hillary Clinton elected?
She has competition. She's just crushing them right now. I mean,
are any of you worried that if she doesn't have a vigorous challenge, it could hurt her chances of winning? Is anybody worried about that?
I'd like to see an Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden in there for her to run against and maybe get a little more of a race that way.
Yeah. Does anyone else share Bill's wish on that she get a tougher contest to kind of get ready for a general election?
I think Bernie Sanders is going to surprise people. He's going to have a bigger voice than he's given credit for. And
tell me why you think that, John.
I personally like his policies. I like he does answer the questions.
Would you like his presence in the race to cause her to take more progressive positions?
Oh yeah.
You think it'll have that effect if he does well?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it has already.
I think she's going to have to lean more to the left now.
If he did have a good chance, would any of you feel he'd be someone more to your liking than Hillary Clinton?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
You both would like him more if he could be the nominee?
Oh, yeah. Right now, whether we like it or not, we have a Citizens United America, and you need to raise a lot of money. And he's just not, there's just so many characteristics where he just doesn't stand a chance.
Christina, do you think anything about Bernie Sanders or not on your radar?
I don't know much about him, no.
Okay. Martin O'Malley, who knows who that is?
Governor of Maryland?
Governor of Maryland, former governor of Maryland. Al, what do you think about Martin O'Malley?
I don't know a whole lot about him. The little I've seen of him, he does sound like a good guy, but I just haven't really read too much of his stances lately, so I really couldn't say.
Charlie, what do you think of him?
You know, I know he's a bit to the left of Hillary on a few issues, and I think I personally land somewhere in between Bernie Sanders and Hillary. And so, you know, it probably aligns a little better with me than either of the other two.
Anyone have thoughts about Jim Webb? Anybody know who he is?
I've seen him in interviews and stuff. I do like he is direct. I don't know. I haven't seen him too much recently in the news, but just in the past, and anytime I've come across him in the news or whatever, I've always liked what he had to say.
Raise your hand if you think if Elizabeth Warren got in the race and did well, she could win the caucuses. Raise your hand if you think she could beat Hillary in the caucuses.
I don't think she could beat Hillary.
No one would
I
go.
don't know if anyone can beat Hillary.
Okay. Is there anybody you think could beat Hillary, or is she for the nomination, or she's unbeatable?
At this point, yes.
Yeah. Charlie, anybody you think could beat her?
No, I don't. Not that I've heard of.
The Clintons tend to.
That's what Democrats had to say back in May going into the season in Iowa. So those are Iowa Democrats. These are the people who are going to be making the decisions come February 1st. I just want to make a couple of notes here. That was in May, so Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee are no longer running for president, and so that clears them up. Martin O'Malley, according to polling data from last month, he was still trailing with only 5.1% of the support of likely voters throughout Iowa. And so it doesn't look like he's really going to get anywhere. I expect to see Martin O'Malley dropping out shortly after, probably either after Iowa or after New Hampshire. I don't think we're going to see Martin O'Malley stay in the race long. A couple of other observations is that one of the respondents, when it came to Jeb Bush, the question is like, kind of why? Why do we want Jeb Bush? We've had enough Bushes already. And yet, if you look at Republicans, they feel the same way about Hillary Clinton. Why? We've already had 8 years of Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton won't go away. So that's what's going to be making this particular election cycle very, very interesting to watch, because neither the Democrats like Jeb Bush and the Republicans don't like Hillary Clinton. And so now we got other factors at work. All the while, it appears, a month out, it appears that Hillary is most likely going to come out of the Iowa Caucuses intact. Again, looking at polling data from a month ago, and this is subject to change, the Real Clear Politics average of polls for the Iowa Democratic Caucus is Hillary 52.7% and Bernie Sanders 35.0%. But that's not to say that things can't change in this next month. And really, Bernie Sanders needs to flip 8% of the vote from Hillary to Bernie in order to have a neck-and-neck tie on caucus night. That is actually doable when you're dealing with about 30 days out. It can be done. The question is, will it be done? And that's what we're going to see in this next month. It's going to. We've got about a minute left. Before I'm not even going to finish my last statement, I do want to give you a brief bit on the caucus calendar. February 1st, Iowa caucus. February 9th, New Hampshire primary. After that, we've got caucuses throughout February in Nevada and the South Carolina primary. And then March 1st, a Super Tuesday with 12 states for the GOP and 11 states for the Dems. And then by March 8th, I really think that we will know who the nominee is for both parties. So we got about a 6-week run that starts in 4 weeks. But with that, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week as we discuss the Republicans.